This is London. Hello and welcome. I'm Brian of London and this is Shire Network News. This is the premier humour and interview show of the English-speaking peoples of the world, taking on the difficult and indeed, for some, dangerous issues of the day. But mostly, we poke a bit of fun the way of totalitarian, free speech denying lunatic ideologies wherever they are. We like to believe we are equal opportunity offenders, and if you've got a problem with that, call your local Human Rights Commission. Coming up a bit later is this week's feature interview. It's with Ezra Levant, former publisher of Canada's Western Standard newspaper, who was famously hauled up in front of some sort of bogus province of Alberta Kangaroo court for a variety of thought crimes. He fought back by arguing against the entire process and posting a video of his encounter with the interrogator on YouTube. As a result of everyone on the planet being able to actually see inside the real-world equivalent of Room 101, his interrogator has now quit the case.
She has resigned the case. Why? She wrote to my lawyer saying she has never been subject to such public odium in her life. I mean, if you search her name, Shirlene McGovern, on the Internet, I mean, there are hundreds of hits, usually by bloggers, who are criticizing her and calling her as they see her, a fascist, a government abuser of rights, not an enhancer of rights, and she couldn't hack it.
And you can hear more from Ezra Levant a bit later in the show. In addition to this rather exciting news, we have pieces sent in from Doug and, of course, our regular chat with Evan Sayert. But, of course, it wouldn't be Shire Network News if we didn't have Blog News. As those of you who listened to our show last week may have already worked out, we're not very happy with the Archbishop of Canterbury. In fact, we smacked him around like a piñata, pretty much right through the show. But one of the blogosphere's finest satirists, Iowahawk, has outdone anything we could ever dream of accomplishing. He's taken the style of Geoffrey Chaucer and, inspired by Rowan Williams' endorsement of Sharia law in England, come up with a modern-day addition to the Canterbury Tales, the tale of the Asse-Htte. You can find the original online, and I'll link in the show notes. But to give you a taste, here's an excerpt.
But Father Williams, said the gay man, though I am but a layman, the Mussulman youth hath smite me so, when on the streets I saunter with my bow. Said the bishop in a curt reply, I am as tolerant as any other guy, but if Mussulman law says no packing fudge, really now who are we to judge? Then bespake the Pomo artist, my last sculpture was hailed as smartest by sundry critics up the Tate, who called it genius, brilliant, great, a Jesus sculpted out of dung, and 4 stars in the Guardian. But now the same shtick with Mohammed has earned a bounty on my head. Said the bishop, that's quite impressive to craft a Jesus so transgressive, but to do so with the Muslim prophet doomed thy neck to lose what's off it. Thou should have shown more chivalry in committing such a blasphemy. And so it went, the pilgrims all, complaining of the Muslim thrall. To each his same, the bishop lectured about the culture fabric textured with rainbow threads from every nation, with rainbow laws for all situations. The pilgrims shuffled for the door to face the rule of them all. Poets, professors, Starbuck workers, donning turbans, veils and burqas. As they face their final curtain, of England folk one thing is certain, dying by their own 1,000 cuts. The England folk are folking nuts.
Saudi Arabia's religious police plan to behead a woman accused of being a witch. No, hang on, that can't be right. First we have some sort of bizarre and manifestly unjust application of Sharia law, And then I come in with some sort of exaggeration for comic effect. Let's read on. Fawaz Falia was arrested and interrogated in the northern town of Kiryat 2 years ago and sentenced to death, as you do. The judges who convicted her relied on her forced confession and the statements of witnesses who said she had bewitched them. One man claimed he became impotent after she cast a spell on him. Sounds like a friend of mine's ex-wife. Let me just check. Nope. This isn't from the Massachusetts Farmer's Almanac and Good Wife's Guide to Child Beating, circa 1620. It is, in fact, taking place right now. Witchcraft is considered an offence against Islam in Saudi Arabia. It's considered an offence against common bloody sense where you and I live, but then we've managed to put remote-controlled vehicles on the surface of Mars, and these guys still chop people's heads off for possessing supernatural powers. So I guess we'll just have to call it a draw. You know us, we don't like to be judgmental. The following comes from Islam Online by way of the website europenews.dk. A mosque in the city of Leicester will soon allow a dog into its premises to help its blind owner attend congregational prayers, a precedent supported by the umbrella Muslim organisation and welcomed by congregants. To tackle the inevitable issue of Muslim-owned guide dog, we engaged in conferences with relevant agencies, imams and mosques in Leicester to learn, raise awareness and tackle the issue. Imam Ibrahim Mogra, chair of the Interfaith Committee at the Muslim Council of Britain, told IslamOnline.net. One mosque has been identified in Leicester, and we will pilot a case there in 2008. They need to pilot this? What could possibly go wrong? The guide dog will remain in a purpose-built kennel outside the prayer hall of the mosque and wait for the blind teen to come out after worship. Imam Mogra said the MCB carried out a full review of the Sharia ruling on keeping dogs. It is correct to say that the saliva of a dog is regarded impure, he noted. A retriever salivates less than other dogs and thus reduces the chance or risk of flicking spittle onto worshippers. They actually checked which dogs salivate more or less. Oh, I'd love to see that experimental method. Cutty's retriever is getting extra training to restrain it from instincts to lick its owner. Islam forbids Muslims to keep dogs as pets. However, it is permissible to have a dog for legitimate benefits, such as hunting or guarding. It would have been hard, I guess, for Muhammad to predict guide dogs. Pity, if they'd been written into the exclusion 1400 years ago, then we wouldn't be talking about whether they could have a guide dog in a mosque. Back to the article. Miriam Lorgat, a student at Loughborough University where Qatari studies, also commended the mosque leaders. It is appropriate that we are discussing relevant issues like this, said Lorgat, a regular Al-Falah mosque congregant. As time goes on, there will be more guide dog users all over the country. This will help break many barriers. Oh dear. As time goes by and more of the UK population is converted to Islam, there will be fewer dogs. That's for sure. Mohammed El-Masri, who, in his spare time, serves as the national president of the Canadian Islamic Congress, was last referenced on this podcast as a complainant against the publication of extracts of Mark Stein's book, America Alone, in a magazine. He has now apparently decided that, with the Archbishop of Canterbury having run up the white flag, it's time for a little interfaith dialogue. More specifically, he's had a look at Christian theology and practice, and has decided some of it will simply have to go, such as that minor bit of unimportant ecclesiastical effluvia that hardly anyone pays any attention to, the Lord's Prayer. He says, I believe that most Ontarians, whether they profess religion or follow no religion at all, would agree with me that the Lord's Prayer should be replaced, not by another prayer, but with an inclusive and purposeful pledged to serve. Canadian blog Blue Like You offers this modest alternative to the old, worn-out version. Our Premier, which art in Ontario, diversity be thy name, thy province come, thy will be done, in earth as it is in Toronto. Give us non-gluten alternatives to bread, and forgive us our fibs, as we forgive liberals who fib against us. And lead us not into faith-based schools, but deliver us from John Tory. For thine is non-sectarian, all-inclusive and PC, for diversity and multiculturalism. A people. Steven Spielberg has done the right thing and told the Chinese government he won't be choreographing the opening ceremony at the Beijing Olympics. It seems that hiring the director of Schindler's List may have been a typical tone-deaf move by the Chinese Communist Party, which is funding the genocide in Darfur, jailing dissidents, and occupying Tibet. May this be one of many such blows that rain down on the Beijing 2008 Let's Replay the Berlin 1936 Olympics effort. Naturally, Western governments have decided that what human rights activists have overlooked is that the Chinese trains run on time. Nothing to do with lucrative Chinese business deals which might benefit their fat cat party supporters. Oh no, perish the thought. But the Spielberg announcement that he wants nothing to do with a repressive, violent dictatorship seems to have caught the Chi-Coms flat-footed. Nicholas Beckelin of Human Rights Watch is quoted as saying, "China's foreign ministry is confused. They have been getting rave reviews from Western diplomats and the United Nations for their role in Sudan, Burma, and North Korea. But now, in terms of public opinion, this is becoming a disaster." Imagine that. Diplomats and the UN applaud violent repression and dictatorship, while Western people don't. It's almost as if there's some sort of widening gap between ordinary people and their governments. In 1936, at the Berlin Olympics, the British Foreign Office insisted that the England football team give the Nazi salute before their match against Germany, which they did, to their everlasting shame. And the modern British Olympic Association looks set to repeat the move by forbidding athletes chosen for the British team from criticising China politically. Perhaps they're allowed to complain about the weather. Unless, of course, that is helping the factories produce more choking smog that day, in which case, best steer clear. It seems little has changed between Berlin and Beijing. Craven diplomatic appeasement, like rust, never sleeps. And now it's time for our feature interview. It's with Canadian publisher Ezra Levant, who has been on a full-tilt boogie for freedom of speech since he published the dreaded Motunes of Death, and being hauled in front of one of these bogus people's tribunals that seem to have sprung up like mushrooms in dark, unlit corners of a basement. But Ezra didn't knuckle under to the state. He fought back. He tells Shire Network News' senior Canadian constitutional affairs correspondent, Tom Payne, why he turned and counterattacked, and why standing up for yourself seems to be the most effective policy when confronted with bullies.
2 years ago, when I was the publisher of Canada's Western Standard magazine, we reprinted the Danish cartoons to show our readers what all the fuss was about, because we were hearing about these riots overseas, and we wanted to show people what was allegedly at the heart of them. And, we published them in a fairly calm manner, like a prosecutor would put a piece of evidence to a court. This is what the fuss is about. It caused a kerfuffle in Canada, but not in any violent way, just a lot of media interest. Well, one local imam named Syed Sohrawardy, born in Pakistan, does the Saudi lecture circuit, wants Sharia law in Canada. You probably know the type. He debated me on the radio, and I think I won the debate, but, it doesn't matter. What matters is that after the debate, he was so incensed at me that he went to our local police department and asked them to arrest me. Now, they politely told him he wasn't in Saudi Arabia anymore, so he shopped his complaint around town, and he found one agency illiberal enough to take his complaint. It's called the Alberta Human Rights Commission, and it's a very Orwellian commission because instead of promoting human rights like freedom of speech, freedom of religion, pluralistic society where we can, all have our different points of view, they actually constrict those. And for 2 years they've been hounding me now because I published those cartoons. And so this imam, Syed Sohrawardy, filed a complaint, and then a copycat complaint was filed very shortly thereafter by the Edmonton Muslim Council. And for 2 years, the government of Alberta, secular government, using taxpayers' money, has been having lawyers and bureaucrats hound me for 2 full years, and we're not even close to being done. A month ago, I was subject to a 90-minute interrogation by a government, quote, human rights officer about what my thinking was, what was going through my head, what were my political thoughts and religious thoughts as I published these cartoons. So after that interrogation, I actually videotaped it and posted the video to YouTube, the internet video sharing website. And those videos have collectively been watched 500,000 times, and it's caused a great debate in Canada about freedom of speech and the proper role of these human rights commissions. And I have to say that the media and pundits and commentators are practically united, from the left to the right, from big newspapers to small, that these commissions are out of control. And the public scrutiny has actually turned on my aggressors, the people who were coming after me, including this Calgary imam, who just a couple of days ago, because he was getting shellacked in the press, dropped the complaint against me. Now, he hasn't done so formally. As far as my lawyer and I know, we're still being grilled by the commission. And even if he does drop it, the Edmonton complaint proceeds. So really the only change in the last little while is that one of the imams has cried uncle, but not because we've done anything to him other than expose him as a tin pot fascist, and he doesn't like that reputation. But even if he were to walk away, and even if the case against me were to be dropped, which it hasn't yet been, well, the taxpayers of Alberta are out about $500,000 for their public inquisition against me, and I myself have had tens of thousands of legal bills, first paid for by the company and now paid for by me. Now, thankfully, I've had some donors help, but it's outrageous to me that this imam could file such a spurious and vexatious complaint, have it run by the government of Alberta, and then he just simply walks away and say, oops, I didn't mean to do that. It's not working out as I thought. Let me just pretend that never happened without paying a dime. I mean, in a way, the process has become the punishment.
Well, that was your main beef when you actually posted the videos of your interrogation on YouTube. You didn't bow your head and say, well, look, how can I get around this, or I'm sorry, or you actually turned and counter-assaulted. You said, why am I here? I shouldn't even be here. I'm not even going to answer, your question because you have no right to ask it in the first place. Did that take the interrogator from the Human Rights Commission a bit aback? She seemed like a nice enough lady, but she didn't seem to quite understand how to sort of take your assault on the actual fundamental basis of the proceedings in the first place.
Oh, she didn't know what was going on. I mean, she came in, I was there, I was compelled to attend. This human rights officer, her name was Shirlene McGovern, has extraordinary powers under the law. She can come into my office at any reasonable hour, her definition of reasonable, and take any document for photocopying, copy anything on my computer hard drive, and take it away with her without a search warrant. And she can even come into my home and do so. She has to get the court's permission, but it can be an ex parte hearing. That is, I'm not even told about it. That's the kind of tools police use to go after drug lords, but the human rights officers have those powers. So when this woman summoned me, it was not a friendly, voluntary meeting. It was like being called down to the police station. And I was not there freely. I was there under duress and under protest. So she walked in the room and was all smiley and chirpy and chatty and wanted to make small talk with me, which was stunning. And then she put out her hand to shake mine, and I said, I'm sorry, I'm not going to shake your hand. We're not meeting in a friendly circumstance. This is not a social visit. And she said to me, well, I'm very friendly. I said, if we met on the street as equals, I'd shake your hand and be polite. But you are an interrogator, and frankly, you're a bit of a fascist. And she couldn't believe it. I think her feelings were hurt. But what's so incredible to me is that being an interrogator is everyday work for her. And in fact, in one of the clips I put on YouTube, she says, whenever I interview people like this, I always ask them about their intentions. I mean, this is routine for her, and that's what censorship and fascism and government political correctness looks like in the 21st century.
Well, this is one of the things that I actually put to Mark Stein in our podcast last week. I don't know if you heard it. I said to him, looking at the videos that you posted of you being interrogated, reminded me of that scene in Terry Gilliam's film Brazil, where this guy's being interrogated by the state interrogator, and it turns out to be played by Michael Palin, cute and cuddly Michael Palin, the nicest of the pythons. And this is the thing, it's smiley face fascism. The government interrogator is a nice person. It's like, I'm terribly sorry, old chap. I'm just going to have to take a scalpel to your eyeball. Yeah, terrible palaver, I know, but, we have to get through it. That was the whole thing. There was the banality of evil. And when you pointed out to her that what she was doing was evil, she seemed quite offended by it.
Oh, absolutely. Like, I hurt her feelings. And I should tell you, and I haven't mentioned this publicly yet, so a little bit of a scoop, she has resigned the case. Why? She wrote to my lawyer saying she has never been subject to such public odium in her life. I mean, if you search her name, Shirlene McGovern, on the Internet, I mean, there are hundreds of hits, usually by bloggers, who are criticizing her and calling her as they see her, a fascist, a government abuser of rights, not an enhancer of rights, and she couldn't hack it. So she quit my case. Obviously, another human rights officer was there to pick it up. But I don't mind one bit, because I think that someone who makes a living by interrogating people about their political views, I mean, hey, I'll voluntarily submit to such interrogations by journalists, even by people I despise. If it's a voluntary meeting. I mean, I've done 100 interviews about what my thinking was and what my rationale was. I love to talk about it, but not under compulsion of the state. And so if someone makes her living being a state-sponsored bully, I think there should be a public odium attached to that. And she should not be able to go to cocktail parties and feel comfortable saying, oh, yeah, I'm a state censor. No, she should have to fib about it and say that she does something better, like being a used car salesman or a prostitute. I don't think that I think she should have to lie about what she does for a living. She shouldn't be proud about it. And I think that anyone associated with these human rights commissions should wear it. Part of the fight-back strategy here, frankly, is to denormalize what has become too normal. In fact, the very name Human Rights Commission is the most troublesome thing for me, because most people in Canada have never heard of these commissions because they keep a low profile. And when they hear about them, oh, Human Rights Commission, that sounds pretty good. I'd like one of those. And it's so Orwellian. And so we have to destroy the good reputation of these human rights commissions. Just like in Orwell's books, they talked about the Ministry of Peace actually being the war ministry, the Ministry of Truth being the propaganda ministry. Here, the human rights commissions are actually squelching human rights, and we have to denormalize them. And if that means my kindly interrogator's feelings are hurt, that's a price that I think we should all be willing to pay.
Well, someone actually put this whole thing to the acting premier of Alberta, Ed Stelmach, just the other day, and he came out with this ringing endorsement of the right to free speech. Have a listen.
We have in the province of Alberta a system where the Alberta Human Rights Commission hears different cases that come forward under the Charter and protection of human rights. I know that this is an issue that came as a result of some comments made and cartoons, I believe, with respect to the Muslim faith. It's most unfortunate because Alberta is a mosaic of many cultures, and our goal is here through, of course, the additional resources we put into arts and culture, that we bring just better understanding of various cultures in the province of Alberta so that we can live together in peace.
Well, that's not quite Sons of Gondor, Sons of Rohan, my brothers, is it? Less than Churchillian springs unbidden to my lips.
You know, it's disappointing because in Canada we have, of course, the 10 provinces and 3 territories, and each one of these jurisdictions has its own human rights commission. So this premier is the man politically responsible for the interrogation of me. And this has been in the newspaper literally every day since my interrogation. There's no way he hasn't heard about it, been briefed about it. Both of the major newspapers in the province have weighed in on this. So there's no doubt that this has crossed the radar screen of his briefers. And for this to be the best utterance he can come up with is embarrassing. I mean, forget the fact that he's not very facile with the English language. I mean, that's fine. It's the ideas that matter, not the fact that he's not eloquent. But his ideas are such a mushy, free association, politically correct cliches. I mean, I don't even know what that answer meant. And it's a shame because in Alberta, the Conservative Party is known as the party of basic rights and smaller government, and here you have a mushy-mouthed, mushy-minded premier not even weighing in, but just sort of slouching through the question. I was embarrassed for him. And I don't know, it's not a large election issue, let's be frank, but it's an important one for at least a certain minority of Albertans, and I hope that he's asked about that again before the election is out. I'm not going to pretend that this will be an election decider, but I hope it is a pain in his neck and that he's constantly asked about it, and so far so good.
What's happening as regards the fight back on this? I understand that there's a private members bill before the House, that there are some efforts underway to get some political action on this, but there's some resistance, not just from some figures in the Liberal Party, but also people on the Conservative Party aren't entirely sure this is an issue they want to buy into.
That's right. In Canada, we have a Conservative government, but it's a minority government, always in peril. In fact, an election seems imminent. And a couple of elections ago, they lost the election because they were tagged as being anti-human rights. And that painful loss is still so fresh in their minds that I think that what's going on is that they're worried that if they amend these human rights statutes to rein in these commissions and get them out of the thought crime business, that they will be tagged as anti-human rights. In fact, I'm sure that's what's going on. I've talked to enough friends in Parliament. And so I think they're just being extremely risk-averse, and my response to them would be, there is no risk out there. I have not seen a single newspaper editorial, and there's probably been 50 of them in Canada weighing in on the subject. Not a single one supports this thought crime provisions. And you wouldn't expect that from people who use ideas and words for a living, but even people who disagree with me on every political matter, people who don't like me personally, they all say, whatever we think of Ezra, what's happening to him is wrong. And I'm impressed that people have been able to put aside their partisanship and say what's going on is wrong. So I don't think there's a political risk here. In fact, if anything, the political risk is to allow these human rights commissions to continue to censor the marketplace of ideas in a way that's probably antipathetic to their own political causes. I think it would be a real winner for them to tackle it. You did mention Liberal opposition MP, actually a visible minority, Keith Martin, who has introduced a private member's motion to remove the thought crime provisions. And the reason I mention he's a visible minority is that gives him some extra politically correct credibility. People can't just write him off and say, oh, you just hate human rights and hate minorities. No, he's a young, hip, visible minority MP. He's a physician, used to be with Doctors Without Borders, so he's got a lot of lefty credentials, and that was a wonderful breakthrough. Unfortunately, that motion has little chance of getting to a vote, and even if it did, it's a non-binding motion. But still, the symbolism was there, and I think that as Mark Stein's case chugs along, and he's a very well-known writer for Canada's largest magazine, hopefully this issue will grow and grow until it's politically impossible for people like the federal Conservatives or this provincial premier to stay quiet or just issue mushy-mouthed comments about it.
And Tom Paine will be back next week with part 2 of that interview with Ezra Levant, in which he talks about his plan to form a union of bloggers to protect them against bogus legal threats from the likes of Canada's less legally talented version of Lionel Hutz, Warren Kinsella. And now, it's time for Tom Paine's regular weekly chat with Los Angeles-based comedian and conservative political activist, Evan Sayat. Last week, Tom wondered if the McCain nomination was A, the beginning of the great conservative crack-up, or B, a Robert Ludlum nodal. This week, though, the creaking and groaning seems to be coming from the other side.
Well, let's turn our attention away from the great conservative crack-up and look at the civil war on the other side. What on earth is happening to the Democratic Party, Evan?
Oh, it's thrilling. Well, look, it's a classic battle. It's an insurgency versus the heavily entrenched Clinton machine, and I'm having so much fun just watching it. You know, what I love about it, and I'm sure that you and I have discussed this before because it's ubiquitous in the party, but because they have no standards, that's what makes you a Democrat, is that you believe standards are artificially imposed by the patriarchy or by society, and that the only way to be without bigotries and to be without these advantages and disadvantages is to eliminate all standards. Well, because they have no standards, because they have nothing that they truly believe in, all they can do is engage in what I like to call now, I'm stealing it from Jonah Goldberg just a little, the imagery, but it's smiley face demagoguery. When you have Barack Obama is a very attractive demagogue whose argument is, he talks first of all about hope and fear, which are, of course, emotions. What is it you hope for? How will you bring it about? What is it you fear? Are those fears legitimate? Those things are never discussed. He's simply preying on emotionalism. And no matter what Hillary tries to do, she can't out-emotional him because, I mean, he's great. You know, he can tug at your heartstrings and speak of lofty things like hope. And what does Hillary do? If she goes negative, well, that's exactly what we're trying to get away from. She's fear-mongering. She's in a lot of trouble.
And, of course, when Hillary Clinton tries to actually use emotion, the sparks come out from the back of her neck and they have to take her in the back to check the wiring. I was just watching the Family Guy Star Wars spoof the other day, and there's a little bit in one of the specials where they said, we've discovered the secret of great Star Wars dialogue.
Oh, this is an even bigger jackpot than when the Emperor figured out the formula for great Star Wars dialogue.
Something, 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 dark side. Something, 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 complete.
I wonder if Obama's discovered the perfect Democrat talking points. Something, 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 hope. Something, 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 change.
Yeah, back when I was a Democrat, a liberal, and I was writing a TV show called The Arsenio Hall Show, the writers, we joked about it. We said, really, all you have to do to write a good joke is go blah, 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 quail. And there's your joke. You were in the monologue that day. Yeah, they can't talk about things because when you believe in nothing, and I don't mean they don't believe in anything. They believe in nothing. No religion, no countries, no values, no standards. Otherwise, how do you explain a jar of urine with a cross in it being deemed beautiful? By what aesthetic criterion is it beautiful? None. It's beautiful because it tears down what is good. It tears down others' beliefs. So because by definition they don't believe in anything, they believe in nothing, then what is it they can speak about? You know, they can attack imaginary boogeymen like the drug companies. You know, these drug companies that have made our lives so easy, we don't worry about Ebola. We don't worry about a flu wiping out 2/3 of our continent like it did in Europe. We don't even have to worry about restless leg syndrome because of these evil Darth Vaders at the drug company. But because they literally see things in black and white. They see things in terms of utopia versus evil. And when you're arguing for utopia, you can't put forth policy because any policy you have in the grown-up world is going to have costs and consequences. It's going to have what Thomas Sowell calls trade-offs. Sometimes it's even going to be the lesser of two evils. So the only thing they can talk about are meaningless platitudes like hope and fear and change. That's all they have.
Blah, 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 hope, blah, 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 change. Is that going to be his slogan if he gets to be the nominee?
You know what? They won in 2006 based on the slogan, had enough. Okay, but what are you going to do? Well, I'm not going to tell you, just had enough. Yeah, but what are your policies? I'm not going to tell you, just had enough. They can't, they can't offer policy. They can't. Because if you remember Hillary Clinton's Christmas commercial where she just put all these wonderful utopian policies under the Christmas tree so everybody would get free state-of-the-art medical care as a present with no cost or consequences to the child. This is truly the way they think, that they can bring about their utopia, but once they actually start to talk about the cost of a DMV, Department of Motor Vehicles, like bureaucracy running our health care, then they're going to lose people. So all they can do is talk in terms of these lofty but meaningless slogans. That's all they can do.
And you can find more of Evan Sayat's wit and political commentary at his site, www.evansayat.com. Now we travel into the warped and sick world that is Hamas children's television. It was actually I, Brian of London, who first brought to the blog world the stunning and tragic news of the death of Naul the Bee via Israeli Cool Dave's blog, after I saw the tragic footage of Naul dying on Israeli TV news. Poor Naul had replaced Farfour the mouse. But I'll let Doug pick up on the story.
Hi, this is Doug Payton for Shire Network News, asking you to consider this. Regular listeners to SNN will recall that in May of 2007, I talked about the children's show Tomorrow's Pioneers, a Hamas-produced TV show that depicted a young girl and her mouse sidekick named Farfour, meaning butterfly. The purpose of Farfour was to indoctrinate Palestinian children into the idea of jihad and to demonstrate just how evil the Jews are. Episodes on how to properly hold an AK-47 give you an idea of just how charming this show was. At the time, the Palestinian government, aware of the PR fiasco it might be incurring, said they would nix the show. When Hamas refused to stop airing the show, the government said that, well, okay, but they'd be watching it closely. I'm sure they have. And here in February of 2008, the show is still going strong. I guess in the world of the Palestinians, oversight simply means to watch. These days, there's a new sidekick. It's a rabbit named Asse-Htte, meaning lion. Either these Hamas producers enjoy this sort of cognitive dissonance, or they just didn't have the requisite costumes. Asse-Hutte's arrival was required after his predecessor, Naul the Bee, died because he couldn't get to a hospital in Egypt for surgery. Someone apparently didn't tell him that Hamas took down that wall a few weeks ago. Of course, Egypt's feelings toward the Palestinians made a rapid change after that development, from, we support the Palestinians in their plight, to, hey, who invited you here? So it sounds like Naul still wouldn't get his operation, and it still would be Israel's fault. Before Naul, Farfour himself died at the hands of an Israeli, after Farfour wouldn't sell his land and got punched out on camera. The desensitizing of Palestinian children continues unabated, but it's all educational, don't you know? So now Asse-Htte, the rabbit named Lion, follows in these illustrious footsteps, vowing to liberate the Al-Aqsa Mosque and the Palestinian homeland. Not exactly your typical children's television workshop fare. Asse-Htte seeks martyrdom and intends to eat Jews, all while bringing, quote, smiles and joy back to the children of Palestine. Just remember, this is on a television station run by the terrorist group that is in power in the Palestinian territories. This is the voice of a group that wants to be taken seriously on the world stage, and unfortunately is taken seriously by too much of the world. They say they want to live in peace, but ingrain in their preschool children a hatred and desire to kill their neighbors. Now, until this sort of insanity stops, they cannot be taken seriously and cannot be taken at their word. Peaceful is as peaceful does. The rabbit named Lion, who is teaching Palestinian children, isn't. Consider that.
Naul the Bee, may he rest in peace. And meanwhile, we've opened the betting on the mode of the death of Asse-Htte the rabbit. 1,000,000 to 1 dies after getting impaled on a carrot. 1,000 to 1, natural causes. 3 to 5 on, killed by evil disease invented by Zionist scientists called palymatosis. Not only were Egypt not quite so pleased to see their Arab brothers pouring through a hole in the wall that Egypt had built, they were less than impressed this week when one of their killer rockets actually hit Egypt. Oh, and the gunfire directed at Egyptian workers rebuilding the wall hasn't been all that popular. You've been listening to Brian of London and Friends on Shire Network News. We're getting quite a bit more attention than we used to, but we can always do with more. Recommend us to your friends, if you have any after your conversion to the dark side. We've had some word that people can't work out how to make a financial contribution to the show. On our website, shirenetworknews.net, you can find a button on the right-hand side labelled Make a Donation. That's the one to hit. And in other news, ex-Shire Network News contributor Andrew Ian Dodge, now a cancer survivor, has a spiffy new look to his blog. Follow the link to that in the show notes. And now, the end of the show. Here's a foretaste of what you can look forward to from the Democratic Party if Barack Obama manages to pry the presidential nomination away from Hillary Clinton's bony fingers, possibly by throwing a bucket of water over her.
Something.
Change.
Something.